Hello all, welcome to EA Zoom meetings. Thank you so much, the organizers, Linda and everyone who have been doing such wonderful job in terms of establishing an amazing forum for evolutionary astrology. Thank you so much for this opportunity as well. And I'm going to present on, my name is Ashwin to start with, and I'm a fifth generation astrologer from my family, and I have a predominantly Vedic astrology background, but I've kind of opened myself to other forms of astrology as well, such as Hellenistic astrology and evolutionary astrology, at the courtesy of EA Zoom meetings largely. So thank you so much for that. And I publish an e-magazine, and it's bi-monthly, and I also have a website, and I do some YouTube stuff as well. So I think we'll get going straight away to our topic. So I'm going to present on annual profections, which is a very powerful but simple time lord technique from the Hellenistic astrological tradition. So I'm sure some people might be wondering why I'm choosing something that is too technical and not psychological or evolutionary in this group. But the reason why I chose this is because I come from a Vedic background, and for the past 1.5 or 2 years, I've been so much into Hellenistic tradition, and this specific, not just this, but some of the specific techniques and nuances that are present in Hellenistic tradition is so very valuable, not just to the Hellenistic astrologers, but I'm sure it is valuable for all the other forms of astrology as well. So let's say for evolutionary astrology, I don't think anyone uses the outer planets such as especially Pluto. So Pluto, Uranus, Neptune, and Pluto to such great use in terms of unveiling some of the psychological stuff inside a human being. So that's what I think. This particular technique and some of the intricacies or nuances of Hellenistic tradition is going to help the evolutionary astrologers to have even more greater insight into what a specific placement or a specific activation is going to actually trigger in a person's life from a psychological and also even more evolutionary point of view. So I know, evolutionary astrologers know better than me what it actually triggers from an inner psychological point of view. So we'll just get going with the basics of annual profections. So to start with the history, it is so as it is Hellenistic astrology is a form of horoscopic astrology which was practiced in the Mediterranean region, ranging from southern Europe areas such as Greece, and it kind of stretched as far as Egypt, where the city of Alexandria was formed, and it became the hub of all scientific and astrological traditions during that time, ranging from 2nd century BC until 7th century CE, which pretty much coincided with the rise and fall of the Roman Empire. So annual profections is a very basic time lord technique which was introduced by the early Hellenistic astrologers, and if I'm not wrong, it is done by Dorotheus of Sidon, who presented a 5-book series called as Carmen Astrologicum. Today, Carmen Astrologicum has been translated by various scholars such as David Pingree, and also Benjamin Dykes has published Arabic translation of Carmen Astrologicum. So it is pretty much available, and at the courtesy of so much scholars and translators, we have such ancient materials available today to enhance the astrology of our times. So annual profections is a Hellenistic time lord technique, and it was introduced in Carmen Astrologicum by Dorotheus of Sidon. So after that, it became a very common technique and common time lord technique for all the Hellenistic astrologers and also medieval astrologers after 7th or 8th century. And this technique was transmitted very well into the Indian tradition as well, up to 16th and 17th century, which pretty much was the gate was shut for astrology on a more global level, and it was practiced at a very minimal and also not very exclusive levels after the 16th or 17th century, which is after the times of William Lilly. So profection seemed to be a very common technique, even in solar returns and lunar returns and all those things. And profections was basically the establishment with which the ancient astrologers and medieval astrologers used to kind of predict events in a person's life. So what are annual profections? Profection is a timing technique where each house rules a year of a person's life, starting from the first house during the first year of native's life after the birth. The ruler of the house or the sign in which and planet placed in that particular house will be activated as the Time Lord. So let's say a person is born. So I think you'll understand it here. So if a person is born in March of 1995, the person will have his first house activated for the first year of his life until 14th March 1996. And from 15th March 1996, the second house will be activated, and the ruler of the second house will be activated as the Time Lord of the year. So let's say a person is born Libra rising, Venus will be activated as the Time Lord for the first year of life, which is from 15th March 1995 and until 14th March 1996. So for the second year, Scorpio will be activated as the sign of the year, which is the second house, which coincides with the second year of the native life, and Mars will be activated as the Time Lord. So this is the basic premise under which annual profections work. But the other things that you might need to consider is something that you'll I'll explain it in the upcoming slides so that you'll understand. So I hope it is clear at this point. So this is the profections worksheet. You can I got this from the kellysurtees.com. So Kelly Surtees has given this free worksheet for everyone. You can just log on to the below link here and just check this out from her. You can use it for your practical purpose, and you can see here that so all these are ages, and the inner circle has houses. Okay, so the first house 0. So the native is born, and from 0 to 1 it is called as 0 when first house is activated, and the ruler of the first house will be activated as the Time Lord. So when the native is 1 year old, second house is activated, which is basically the second year of native's life. So he'll be running the second year of his life, his or her life. So then third house will be activated when the native is 2 years old, or when the native is running his third year of life. So likewise, it just goes on, and this worksheet kind of helps us. I think this worksheet is very interesting because we have here what are the themes of various houses. So let's say if 10th house is activated, and 10th house is activated, we have themes like career, reputation, success, and fame, or authority, and all those things kind of taking forefront in that particular year of a native's life. So once native is 12 years old, the cycle repeats again from the first house and then goes on. So for every 12 years, the cycle repeats, and each house gets activated from the rising sign. So rising sign is the focal point here, and the cycle begins at the rising sign every 12 years once. So I hope it is clear at this point. Okay, so how do we work with profections? So when each house is activated, it is the ruler of that house or sign that takes over as a ruler of the year. So as I already said, if a person is, so let's say each house is activated. So we had Libra rising as an example. So let's say the native is 31 years old. So when a native is 31 years old, we see that 8th house is activated. And for Libra rising, the 8th house is Taurus, and Venus will be activated as the Time Lord of the year. So the position of Venus and the condition of Venus in the natal chart, and the various influences such as aspects and dignities that Venus is part of will kind of influence or will kind of decide the course of Venus's condition and manifestation of events during that particular year of a native's life. So then the planet that is placed in the activated house is also an important factor to consider. So let's say again, if eighth house is activated, and let's say Venus is actually placed in the eighth house. So Venus is in its own domicile, which makes Venus pretty strong. So what are the eighth house themes here? Taxes, death, inheritance, other people's money. So eighth house is pretty much the opposite of second house, the opposite spectrum of second house. Second house involves all those things that completely belong to us. That is our own income, our own finances, and everything. On the other hand, eighth house is whatever is belonging to others. And on the other hand, eighth house also directly relates to occult stuff and all those things. So Venus in a good dignity kind of promotes all these things in a much better manner, or you know, it's not necessarily about death or other negative things, but eighth house stuff such as occult knowledge or astrology. I began my astrological studies when my eighth house was activated. So things like that also, come to the forefront when eighth house is activated with Venus placed in Taurus. And the good thing about Venus placed in Taurus and eighth house activated is that Taurus is a fixed earthy sign, and things are going to kind of remain stable, and whatever we acquire during that year is probably going to stay with us for quite a long time, and we are going to cherish each and everything that Venus kind of gives to us during that year, precisely because Venus is in its own domicile, and that too Venus is placed in a fixed earth sign. So let's say some other planet is placed in the eighth house and not Venus. So let's say it's Saturn. So Saturn will, Venus is activated as the Time Lord of the year, but on the other hand, Saturn also plays a major role because Saturn is placed in the activated sign of the year. So what dignity does Saturn have in Taurus? Saturn kind of likes to fix boundaries and limitations, and Saturn also likes the fixed nature of what Taurus has to offer. So we have a little bit of positive stuff with Saturn in Taurus, but what can Saturn do in eighth house is all about intense transformations and all those things during that particular period. And that is a phase where even death is actually, we might kind of inherit something at the cost of losing someone. So all those things kind of turn up when Saturn is placed in the eighth house, and if it is also co-activated along with the ruler of the year, that is Venus. So depending upon the conditions of Venus and other aspects that Venus and Saturn kind of fall through, things will change. So I'm not getting into the details of aspects and all those things. I'm just going to present the basic stuff in terms of how to use annual profections. So I'm sure aspects are all kind of very much familiar to all the astrologers in common. So planets aspecting the ruler of the year or the planet in the activated house will influence the nature and quality of the year in the native slave. So that's what I was talking about. So concerning the condition of the profected planet in the natal chart. So in order to kind of determine or predict or understand the nature of events or the quality of events, be it positive or negative, that is going to take place in native's year during that particular year is largely determined by these four factors. One is standalone dignity, the other is configurations with the benefics, then it comes the configurations with the malefics, and then it is bounds or terms. So we'll just check all these out in a much more brief manner here. So what is standalone dignity? Standalone dignity is a planet placed in its own sign, that is domicile, and the next is exalted, a planet that is placed in its exaltation, and next is friend's sign and enemy sign. I think I'm picking this up from Vedic tradition. So each planet has its friendly signs and also enemy signs. So, for example, Saturn feels comfortable in Venus's signs, and Venus feels comfortable in Saturn's signs. So, like that, we have a lot of criteria in terms of what becomes a friendly sign and what is an enemy sign. So, and then comes a debility and detriment. So, debility is the sign that is exactly opposite to its exaltation sign. So, and detriment is the sign that is exactly opposite to its rulership sign. So Venus's detriment is in Scorpio, and Mars's detriment is in Taurus and Libra. So likewise, detriment is the exact opposite sign, 180 degrees exactly opposite from its rulership sign. So that's what detriment is. So configurations with the benefits. So basically, when we see a planet that is activated as the ruler of the year, feels much more comfortable and easier when it is actually in configuration with a natural benefic such as Jupiter or Venus. So and on the other hand, so I think it's pretty much self-explanatory and clear, because when the ruler of the house actually is coincided with configured with natural benefic like Venus or Jupiter, things tend to be more easier and more organic with the flow without much hurdles during that particular year of life. And it can also act as a mitigating factor when the actual benefic is activated as the ruler of the year, as the 6th or 8th or 12th lord. So let's say Venus is activated as the 6th lord for Taurus rising. So Venus rules the 6th house, and 6th house is supposed to be the house of hurdles and illness or hurdles or debts and all the things. So let's say Venus gets in touch with a natural benefic Jupiter through a trine aspect. So that becomes a very, it is a mitigating factor where Venus feels rejoiced when it is actually in contact with a natural benefic. On the other hand, let's say Venus forms a hard aspect with Mars or any other natural malefic, things tend to be more difficult. So I think that's what you'll see here. So things tend to be more difficult, and we see a lot of hurdles because 6th house as in kind of signifies hurdles, and 6, 8, and 12 fall in aversion from a geometrical point of view from the ascendant, which kind of makes it hurdlesome or troublesome. And when 6th lord is in connection with natural malefics like Saturn or Mars, things tend to be more difficult and not so harmonious or cordial in terms of life's progress during that particular course of the year. So next is bounds or terms. Bounds are the division of zodiac sign into 5 unequal parts, where each of the traditional planets except the luminaries get to rule a bound. So Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury will rule a bound in every sign. It is not that it is not divided into equal parts like decans, because in decans we have each planet ruling the fixed 10 degrees of a sign. But that's not the case when it comes to bounds, because bounds are unequally split. And for example, Sagittarius, Jupiter rules the first 12 degrees of Sagittarius, and Saturn and Mars get to rule the final 2 and 4 degrees, if I'm not wrong, 2 and 4 degrees of Sagittarius towards the end of Sagittarius. So it is quite unequally distributed and assigned to each planet, and the luminaries and the nodes and the other outer planets do not get a bound. It is just Mercury, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, and Saturn get to rule a bound. So a planet placed in the bounds of natural benefics tend to be more happier and more cordial and more easier to deal with, and a planet placed in its in a natural malefics bound tends to be more difficult or more constructive with a little bit of hurdles during the course of the year. So a planet placed in its own bound is considered to be in its own sign by the ancient Hellenistic astrologers. So I can give you some good examples here. Like one is like Venus in Virgo. Venus in Virgo is fallen. Venus is debilitated in Virgo, but Venus placed on its own bounds in Virgo gives a lot of strength in a native to kind of deal with a lot of personal things and self development and personality development and all those things kind of shine very well. These people are very good in at least one form of art, but on the other hand, things that are leading up to external stuff like Venus is kind of signifying how a person mingles with others and how a person gets going along with other people. So that's where people face trouble. So one spectrum of personal stuff and our own interests are all promoted, but on the other hand, the external stuff like dealing with people and dealing with relationships always become a bit difficult, even though Venus is placed in its own bounds. So what I mean to say is, at the end of the day, Venus is considered to be in its own sign when it's in own bounds, and it is surely powerful. So for sure, you want to take a planet's placement in bounds. So if you're not aware, I think Morinus is a free astrology software where you can download it through from the internet, and you can see you can select the bounds through the options available there. And there are two bounds, like two forms of bounds. One is Ptolemaic bounds and one is Egyptian bounds. I mean, crazily, both work very well. I know people who work with, I work with Egyptian bounds and it works crazily well. And I know some of my good friends who work with Ptolemaic bounds and that works very well as well. So there is no doubt about it. So you can use or choose to work with any bounds that kind of, that you can resonate with very well. So reception. So mitigating aspects through reception. What is a reception basically? So let's say Jupiter is placed in Libra and Venus is Jupiter is placed in Libra and ruler of Libra is Venus, and Venus is, let's say Venus is placed in Cancer. So even though there is a square aspect, square is usually considered to be a bit tougher aspect than the trine. So even though this is a square aspect, Venus, the ruler of Libra, receives Jupiter, which is placed in its own sign, because it is configured through a specific aspect called a square aspect. So when a planet is actually able to kind of configure with a planet that is placed in its sign through either of the aspects, classical aspects such as conjunction, opposition, square, trine, and sextile, the planet's position in a particular sign is much more it is even more activated. It is promoted in a positive manner despite hard aspects. So even Saturn Mars square aspects kind of have a little bit of positive things to deal with when the ruler of the house kind of gets in touch with the planet that is actually placed in there. So if you see here, Jupiter is placed in Scorpio, and the ruler of Pisces receives Moon in Pisces. So Moon is placed in Pisces, and Moon and Jupiter are placed in trine from each other, and Jupiter receives Moon in its own sign, which makes Moon a bit more happier in terms of promoting its own its own functions based upon the rulership and also the functions of Pisces as a sign itself, because Jupiter is responsible for whatever happens in Pisces and Sagittarius, and Jupiter, when it forms a configuration with a planet that is actually receiving or hosting in its own sign, helps it to promote the deeds of that particular house, and it acts as a good mitigating factor, even when there are a little bit of hard things involved. So likewise, we have Mars in Leo, the ruler of Scorpio, receives Mercury in Scorpio. So we all know that Mars and Mercury don't get along well necessarily, but still Mars, he becomes he becomes responsible for whatever happens in Scorpio, and he kind of has to help Mercury when it's placed in Scorpio. So Mars, when it is kind of configured to Scorpio through some kind of aspect, not necessarily square, but any aspect. I'm talking about again the classical aspects and not the minor aspects. Classical aspects like opposition, square, trine, sextile, and conjunction. So that kind of promotes the deeds of that particular house, and even hard aspects can turn out to be a bit more constructive uh, than being destructive. So and that is what reception is. That's why reception becomes very powerful in terms of deciding the course of a native's life during that particular year. Okay, sect. I'm sure you need to. So I really thought this is important for everyone to know what is sect. Sect is a differentiating factor in kind of differentiating a chart as day chart and night chart, and it adds quality in interpretation. And we have this is the image that I got from Chris Brennan's website. So the credit goes to Chris Brennan. So when sun is placed above the horizon, the chart is said to be a day chart, and when sun is placed below the horizon, the chart is said to be a night chart. So it's as simple as that. So I'm not talking about the day births and the night births. It is not the AM PM thing. It is as simple as that. When you find sun above the horizon, you consider it as a day chart, and when you find sun below the horizon, you consider it as a night chart. So that's as simple as that. And we have diurnal planets and nocturnal planets. So in other words, you can call it as the day planets and the night planets. So the diurnal planets is you find Sun, the leader of the team. Sun is the sixth light. Jupiter is the most benefic planet during the day, and Saturn is the most constructive malefic during the day. So you can find that Saturn is more constructive and not very destructive in a day chart. So in a nocturnal chart or a night chart, Moon rules the sect, and Moon is the leader of that particular sect, and Venus is the most benefic planet, and Mars is the most constructive malefic. So let's say it is a night chart, and Saturn is Saturn is the most destructive planet in the night chart, and Mars is the most constructive planet in the night chart, and Venus is the most benefic planet in the night chart, and Jupiter is the most not lesser benefic planet in the night chart, and Moon rules the sect, and the position of Moon matters a lot. But I think that leads us to other areas. I just wanted to bring some basic concept of sect because I think it adds value to the interpretation of the chart. So okay, so the moment we see this and the moment we hear about sect, we have a question as to at least I had a question, and many people had a question in the past as to why Saturn is a day chart, a diurnal planet, and Mars is a nocturnal planet. Because just from the outset, we tend to think that Saturn is a nocturnal planet and Mars is a diurnal planet. But this is what Ptolemy had to say, who was a second century Hellenistic astrologer. In his Tetrabiblos, he says, Saturn and Mars have not been allotted as diurnal and nocturnal planets respectively, based upon the division of time, but based upon their nature. The diurnal planets already offer heat, and Saturn's coldness adds a counterbalancing effect, while Mars' dryness adds counterbalance effect to the moisture. So it is so logical, and it has been rationalized that the nocturnal the nocturnal chart already has a lot of moisture in it. Venus and Moon kind of adds moisture, but there is no dryness or heat, and Mars adds dryness to add a counterbalancing effect. On the other hand, Sun and Jupiter promoting the fire element, Mars kind of Saturn kind of brings the much necessary coldness as a counterbalancing effect to the diurnal chart. Okay. So I think we are here with examples. So uh, I hope everyone can see the screen and the chart clearly.
Yes, they're very clear.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm just going to analyze the, two events of Leonardo DiCaprio's life, and it it uh, it coincides with the sixth house activation and the seventh house activation, where so we all know that Leo kind of won the Academy Award for the movie Revenant in 2016. February 2016 was the award ceremony. But before that, in 2015, the movie was completely shot during that 1 year, and Leo had to shoot the movie along with the team in the year 2015, which was his 41st year of his life. Uh, 41st year of life when sixth house is activated. So if you see this, the worksheet, sixth house is activated during the 41st year of the native's life. So when Leo was shooting for the movie Revenant, his sixth house was activated, and sixth house indicates hurdles and difficulties. It also indicates illness. The ruler of the sixth house is placed in the 10th house and it's retrograde. So we see that Saturn is placed in the 10th house and it is retrograde, and 10th house indicates profession. So the activation of the 10th house and the lord of the sixth house indicates difficulties and troubles due to work or troubles at work. So, I mean, if anyone doesn't know the context of the movie or as to how it was shot, Revenant was completely shot in extremely cold conditions. The movie was shot in northwest Canada and regions like Alberta and some of the forest areas and high mountain ranges in western Canada and also some parts of Argentina. Again, higher ranges and altitudes where the weather was almost as bad as minus 35 degrees Celsius. And they had to kind of resort somewhere there and stay for quite a long time inside the forest and the wild to kind of shoot this movie under extremely cold conditions. So, I mean, he had to get into the lakes, rivers, and streams whenever the scenes in the movie demanded. And now we cannot. I mean, it is not even possible for us to imagine getting into a water body when the external temperature is 35 degrees Celsius or so. So the Jupiter as so from the outset, so we see that Sun is below the horizon, and this is a nocturnal chart. So Jupiter is placed contrary to its sect, and Jupiter is not in its own sect because Jupiter belongs to the day chart or the diurnal chart. So Jupiter is a diurnal planet, and Jupiter is placed in the nocturnal sign and also in the sixth house, which makes it even more difficult. And its relationship with the ruler of that particular house, Saturn in retrograde position, indicates a lot of difficulties and hurdles that a native had to kind of go through. And there was no, there was no escape in this case, and he had to do a lot of things. So I saw the making of this picture, and Leo was just basically wearing a dress, and over that he was wearing some very old and damaged coat or something. I don't know how you call it, but I'm not coming from a cold condition. I live in a tropically, I mean, it's a tropical and hot climate here. So he wears something, just one thing over his innerwear, and he gets into the, I think it is a river. So, and the external temperature was around minus 28 or 29, and it was in Canada. So it was such extreme conditions, and Saturn indicates coldness. in terms of, and it also directly relates to the fact that 10th house is the profession, and 6th house, let's not rule sixth house out here, because 6th house indicates the salaried employment. So it kind of directly relates to some form of employment or profession or something like that. So there is a good relationship between the 6th and the 10th house. And even though there is a trine relationship, which is an easier aspect between Jupiter and Saturn, it created a lot of difficulties from the outset. Um, but how it kind of turned out to be, and how it turned out to be very positive in terms of outcomes during the next year of his life, is what we are going to see next. Because in the 7th house, during the in the 7th house activation during the 42nd year, so 7th house is activated during the 42nd year of the native's life. Jupiter is activated as the ruler of the year because Pisces is activated as the sign of the year. 7th house is the first gateway into the public sphere, and the 7th house until the 6th, until the 7th house, it is all about our own personal and internal stuff. But once we reach the 7th house, it is about others and how we project ourselves to others. And 7th house always acts as a gateway into public sphere, and it acts as the first frontier in terms of how we present ourselves to public. So recognition, fame, and everything kind of starts with the 7th house, and it gets culminated in the 10th house. So Jupiter is activated as the ruler of the year, as Pisces is activated as the sign of the year. And now the reception actually perfectly works. I hope we just saw the reception and mitigating aspects through reception in one of the previous slides here. Okay, so we are going to just see that practically how it is working here. So lot of the year Jupiter is in trine to Saturn in the 10th house, and Mercury, which is the ruler of the 10th house, which is placed in the 2nd house. So there is a beautiful trine between Jupiter, Saturn, and Mercury, which indicates, so despite the fact that Jupiter is placed in the 6th house, now we know that a much more easier or a much more harmonious house is activated, which is the 7th house. 7th house is always much more easier than the 6th house. And here Jupiter forms an aspect with Saturn, which is placed in the 10th house, and it is a far more easier aspect, trine aspect. And Saturn and the ruler of the 10th house, Mercury, is placed in the 2nd house, and 2nd house is income. So it indicates the amount of income and other belongings and wealth that the native acquired through this particular movie and other. So the fame directly relates to the 7th and 10th house axis. Here Saturn, the ruler of the 6th house, is placed in the 10th house, and it is in a retrograde position. And the ruler of the activated sign, Jupiter, becomes a major factor here, because it actually forms a trine aspect here. So there's other things, a little intricacy here. Jupiter is a natural benefic, and natural benefic as a ruler of a specific house gives a more easier configuration to any planet that it is actually making an aspect with. So Saturn here, Saturn is the significator of profession, which is actually placed in the 10th house of profession, and Jupiter's aspect, trine aspect to Saturn, kind of indicates the fame and recognition that the native had acquired during this particular point of time. And we also see that Venus is also placed in the 2nd house, and there is again the whole sign trine here. So for information, I'm just using whole sign houses, and I'm using sidereal zodiac. I'm not using the tropical zodiac. So some of those who have already seen Leo's chart might be wondering why I'm using this, but this is sidereal chart and it's not a tropical chart. So let's move on to the next. So this is the chart of Narendra Modi, who actually won the elections and became the Prime Minister of India for the 2nd consecutive time. And he's he has already assumed office before 2 or 3 days. So, okay. So here, let me just open this chart on my mobile as well, so it makes it easier. Okay, so we have Scorpio rising here, and when this native won the elections and became the prime minister again, he was 69. He was 68 years old, and he was running through the 69th year of his life. So 69th year of his life is activates the 10th house. And what do we have in 10th house here? We have Saturn and Venus. And who's the ruler of the 10th house? 10th house is Leo, and Sun is the ruler of the 10th house. And from the outset, we see that Sun is placed above the horizon, and this is a day chart. And Sun is activated as the ruler of the year. Sun is placed in the house of Good Diamond, which is the 11th house, along with Mercury, which is retrograde but still exalted in a good position. So there is a good reception between Sun and Mercury, even though Sun is just entering Virgo. So 11th house is all about gains and gain victory, and 11th house is also the house of politics and fame. So Sun, the ruler of the 10th house, is placed in the 11th house, and I don't think we really need any other explanation as to how and why this native had won the elections and he again became the prime minister. And we see that Saturn, which is the ruler of the third house, is also placed in Leo, and Saturn is also a diurnal planet. And Saturn is the natural significator of profession, and Saturn rules the third house of courage and authority, and also third house is the house of initiatives. And the third lord in 10th house also indicates assuming office uh, for a specific period of time. But Saturn also gives responsibilities, and third house also deals with responsibilities, and Saturn directly relates to responsibilities. So even though this native has won the elections in style, I'm sure there is a lot of work that he needs to do. There is a lot of burden and responsibility that comes through this victory. For one reason, that Sun is just still early in its, early in Virgo, and it needs to mature as the time progresses during that particular period of year. And still, Sun is in a good placement. That is the 11th house. 11th house is sextile to the rising sign. It is the house of Good Diamond, and I'm sure. I mean, all these reasons kind of facilitate the native. Astrological reasons facilitate the native in winning the elections, and this chart is quite explicit. So we don't even need to discuss about other aspects or something like that. So let's just move on to the next. So this is the first sample chart that we have for today. So I'll just get this open on my mobile. Okay. 2005 and 2006 turned out to be a very important year in this native's life because unfortunately this native had to part away with a long-time relationship uh, with the spouse during this particular year, which is 2005, and it is the 49th year of the native's life. And 49th year, we have second house activated as the ruler of the year um, during the 49th year of age. So, Lord of the second house, Capricorn, is Saturn, and Saturn is placed in the 12th house. And 12th house always signifies the end of something and leads to further uncertainties. Here it is the end of family life, and here there was no uncertainty, but it was just clear that the family life was coming to an end because spouse directly relates to family, and some kind of you know interruptions in life with spouse always uh, ends always signifies an end in family life, because after that we tend to be alone unless and until we find another life partner, and then we again get together with the family. So it is a very literal manifestation, and there is no need of any other aspect. Just the position of the Lord of the year in the 12th house tells us a lot of things about how this relationship ended. And Saturn doesn't really feel comfortable in Mars' sign. And whole sign square with the ruler of 12th house, Scorpio, indicates a clear turning point in family life. Mars is also retrograde, and it actually is an indication to note that family life would actually return. So I don't know if we would have predicted this before. Let's be honest and fair. I'm not sure if we would have predicted that the family life is going to return. We probably would have needed uh, other factors apart from just retrograde, but still, retrogression is backward motion, and in some way, it philosophically or spiritually kind of indicates that something is going to come back, but we are not sure if it is the same person or the other person. So let's leave it at this point. So let's move on to the 50th year of the native, when the third house profection or the third house is activated. Uh, Mars retrograde is in the third house, and here Saturn becomes the ruler of Mars. So, or the ruler of that particular year, because Aquarius is activated as the ruler of the year, sign of the year. So Mars is the ruler of the fifth house, signifying love. In previous case, Mars was also the ruler of the 12th house, indicating something, which was hosting the ruler of that particular year, Saturn, in the 12th house, signifying end. And here, suddenly, uh, still we have Saturn as the ruler of the year, and Mars becomes the ruler of Saturn, because Saturn is hosting Mars, and Saturn becomes the ruler of the year, and Mars is placed in its own sign. Saturn's sign, and Mars rules the fifth house, and fifth house directly indicates love and other relationship, or some kind of good things. Fifth house is the house of good spirit. So Mars is the ruler of the fifth house, signifying love, and Mars is placed in the third house of Aquarius, which indicates that there is no beating around the bush in terms of relationships. And Saturn's square indicates that the turning point is indeed a strong one in terms of getting uh, into another relationship, which I suppose is going strong even today, because Aquarius is a fixed sign. And so we see that how the hard aspect between two natural malefics turn out to be a triggering point of something extremely positive, or a turning point towards something extremely positive in terms of triggering uh, a major life event. So I hope this is clear at this point. And this is the second sample chart that we have for today. And this is about an award this native actually won as a student of the year, and it is a really good recognition, and I'm sure we would see something that is explicit in the chart. So this is the 25th year of the native's life, and in the 25th year we have the second house activated. So the second house is always something that is coming to us, or something that is belonging to us, or something that kind of stays with us for some time after we receive it. So here, Sun and North Node are placed in the second house, and North Node is kind of snatching things. So in this case, it is it is almost indicative that the North Node kind of pushed the native to kind of go ahead and win over something, and beat all the odds around him very quickly, and also in a very unexpected manner. So that's what North Node signifies here, because North Node is all about desire. I'm not saying that this native he kind of desired to kind of get that award, but North Node kind of puts this particular native in a situation where he would be recognized for sure, because North Node puts things in limelight very soon. So Sun and North Node are placed in the second house, and Saturn is the ruler of the second house. Saturn in the first house indicates something that is about to come to the native, and first house directly relates to our own self. So even though we are talking about second house, the ruler of that particular house is placed in the first house, and it indicates something is coming to the native. So that's what we see here. And Saturn in the first house indicates something that is about to come to the native that might actually be a good motivation point to the future life. Sun, the ninth lord in the perfected house of the second house, indicates recognition and rewards in education or higher education, like winning awards and scholarships. Sun is the authority. Sun indicates fame and popularity. On the other hand, Saturn and Sagittarius would have had a profound impact in the native's mindset, eventually would have made the native very spiritual and humanistic during the course of the year. So I'm pretty sure that this year would have turned out to be a very significant year. Also, the previous year would have turned out to be a very significant year in terms of transformation of this native's life, and the actual spiritual and enlightening process would have probably started in the first house activation, but I'm sure this has continued, and this award would have acted as a motivating factor in this case. And on the other hand, if you look at this, the ruler of Sagittarius, which is actually, ruler of Sagittarius, which is actually hosting the ruler of the year, Saturn, is in opposition. So here again, Jupiter is a natural benefic, and we see how the mitigating aspect, the receptions, Jupiter receives Saturn in its own territory, and it adds value to what Saturn is already there and what already Saturn signifies. And Sun kind of puts the native, Sun being placed in the house of activated sign, puts the native in such a position that he's going to win an award for sure during that particular year. So, okay, so this is my own chart, and I don't have problems in sharing my own chart here. So I'm through my, I'm just towards the towards my first Saturn return, and this was during 30th year of my life, and I'm currently running 31, which is 8th house perfection. And 30th year of my life turned out to be quite significant in my astrological career and progress. And I have Venus placed in the 7th house, and 7th house is the house of collaborations and relationships, and I'm going to talk about the theme of collaborations here. Venus also directly relates to collaborations, and Venus is the ruler of Libra, which actually signifies union and collaborations. So Venus placed in its own bounds, that's the most important thing here. Venus, the ruler of the rising sign, is placed in the 7th house, and the ruler of that Scorpio, ruler of Venus, is placed in the 11th house, which is the house of good diamond, Mars. And 11th house also indicates friendships and relationships and collaborations. So the trine between 7th and 11th house, the Venus in 7th house and Mars in 11th house, Venus is applying to Mars here. So I got into a lot of collaborations. I did a lot of collaborative astrological stuff, and it turned out to be a very, very productive year for me in terms of my astrological career. And I never had any disagreements throughout that particular year of my life. And it turned out to be one of the most important stepping stones in my, astrological life. So yeah, so you have two things here to note. One is the planet that is actually placed. The other thing is the reception that Mars gives here. So Mars, even though Venus and Mars are not, they don't like each other, the reception that Mars has to provide Venus, because it is responsible for whatever happens in Scorpio. So that kind of signifies how the events kind of had to manifest more in a cordial manner, because Venus is placed in its own bounds, despite the fact that Venus is in its detriment. Venus turned out to be a very crucial factor in my life during 30th year. So yeah, so I think that brings us towards the end of the session. So
Thank you very much. So you've done the volunteer charts?
yeah, I've done the volunteer charts.
Okay, but you didn't mention the names.
Yeah, I did not mention the names. I didn't know.
Oh, that's okay. Robert and Cameron can go back, and it's okay.
Okay, sure. Okay.
It's okay to mention the first name.
Okay, this is I think Robin's chart, and I hope it was this was one of the I have some other examples for literal manifestations, and this was one of the clear examples of literal manifestations. How Saturn and Mars turned out to be significant despite being in hard aspects in terms of ending something and beginning something really important in life during the course of those 2 years.
Perhaps we could ask for some feedback from the volunteers.
Sure.
Great. Robin.
Can you hear me?
Yes, just one moment and I'll turn off your other mic. Just 1 second. Go ahead, Robin.
Okay.
Okay. Anything at all jump out at you that you'd like to share, or don't worry if not.
Yes, it was I had to end the relationship, and that led to me meeting my current husband a year later, which turned out to be a very positive directions in my life.
Okay, so I have a little bit of thought for evolutionary astrologers, because I'm sure evolutionary astrologers can bring this technique to life much more, because you use Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune, and the importance that you give to Pluto, especially Uranus and Neptune, will kind of help you, uh, you know, uh, understand or give further more insight into a person's life during that particular year. Doesn't matter which form of house division you use. It doesn't matter which form of zodiac you use, or whatever it may be. I'm sure all
I
this.
lost my sound.
Sorry.
It's okay, Robin, we can hear you. Yeah, you're still there.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's what. So it doesn't matter which form of house division or which form of zodiac sign you use, but if you just use this technique of activation of a specific sign or specific house, I think that adds so much of value to it. And yeah, I cannot. I mean, I can imagine what you guys can do with Pluto, Uranus, and Neptune. So I think it's super valuable. So that's the reason why I wanted to present this. And I know Cameron knows we had a little chat in terms of how this can, traditional astrology can actually end up facilitating evolutionary astrologers in a much more constructive way.
Okay, Cameron, any feedback on your chart, on your Profections?
Yeah, it was really strong. I didn't even, and the thing about it was, like, with the spiritual part of it, that was more of like, it was something that was coming in. So it's like something that I didn't even experience directly that year. It wasn't until I like looked back on it until I realized like the significance of it. But everything was pretty spot on. It was interesting to look at the chart from a sidereal point of view, and I could feel it.
Cameron,
so that was interesting. But yeah, it was awesome.
Cameron, just 1 moment. Could you please go to Cameron's chart, because I'm sure he doesn't have a husband.
Sorry.
Have you got a husband? Okay. Go ahead, Cameron. Sorry about that.
No, it's cool. Yeah, no, I just found it interesting because I use the technique. I've used the Time Lord technique, and I do it obviously based off tropical. But looking at it from this perspective, I still can feel the same energy off of it. So it was just cool to watch him delineate that, and it still come out the same.
I mean, the moment I looked Cameron's chart, I know what Cameron posts on his Facebook. He's quite spiritual and philosophical. And the moment I saw the stellium and Sagittarius I knew it was Cameron Allen. The 5 planets in Sagittarius say Cameron Allen.
No, you don't mention surnames. I'm sorry.
Oh, sorry. Okay.
We'll have to cut that part out. Okay, carry on.
Yeah, that's what I wanted to mention. So I think, your explanation, Cameron, here, in terms of resonating with both tropical and sidereal in a same way, kind of attests to the fact that this technique is out of any kind of house division or the form of zodiac. So it is universal and you can use it. There is no limitation or boundaries you can set to yourself.
Right. Yeah. And if anything, in my practice, since I've been like navigating it, it has given me, it's given me an energy or like a box to work in, to where my intuition can like come in and be even more direct. So if anything, it's just like, it's like closed the possibilities, so I can see things clear from wherever somebody's coming from.
Okay. Cool. That's great.
Okay.
Okay.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No, I didn't have anything. Thank you so much for this, and thank you so much, volunteers, and it was very generous of the volunteers.
Well, thank you so much for putting so much effort into this and teaching us a completely new technique, which I think many of us have just learnt for the first time. So thank you very much, Ashwin Balaji, and thank you to our volunteers and our audience, and we'll catch you next time.
Sure.
Thank you.
Oh, wow. Okay, thank you, everyone. We'll catch you later. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.